It sat in my grandfather's garage for 30 years. Nobody touched it after he died. My grandmother wouldn't discuss it. My father avoided the garage altogether. It wasn't until 2023, searching for old tools, that I finally opened it and found a uniform he had never worn, medals he had never spoken of, and a photograph of 12 men standing before a helicopter. On the back in faded ink, Prairie Fire, 1971, the ones who made it home. According to every record that I could find, the mission never happened. Those 12 men never existed. My name is Michael Anderson. This is the story of how I discovered that my grandfather wasn't what we had thought he was. James Anderson. My grandfather died in 1993 when I was 8 years old. I remember him as quiet, kind, always working in his garage, building things, fixing things, never talking much about his past. My grandmother Sarah said he'd served in Nam, Army, came home in '72, got a job at the post office, lived a normal life. So that's the extent of what we knew. The funeral was small, military honors, a flag, taps, the usual ceremony for a veteran. But I remember thinking even then that something felt incomplete, like there was more to the story than we were being told. 30 years later, cleaning out my grandmother's house after she passed, I found the Footlocker. It was military green, heavy, padlocked. My father saw me looking at it. "Leave it," he said. Too quickly, too forcefully. "What's in it?" "I don't know. Your grandmother wouldn't let anyone open it. Said it was your grandfather's and he wanted it left alone. He's been dead 30 years. Doesn't matter. Leave it." But I couldn't. Something about my father's reaction made me more curious. Why wouldn't my grandmother let anyone open it? What was my grandfather hiding? I took bolt cutters to the lock. My father left the garage rather than watch. Inside the Footlocker, a uniform. Not the standard army green I'd expected. This was tiger stripe camouflage. Weathered. Stained in places. The name tape said Anderson, but the unit patch was one I didn't recognize. Below the uniform, medals. A bronze star, 2 Purple Hearts, an Army Commendation Medal, and something else, a medal I had to look up later. The Silver Star for gallantry in action. My grandfather had never mentioned any of these. We'd thought he was a clerk or supply soldier. This was combat recognition, serious combat. At the bottom of the Footlocker, photographs, black and white, faded. Men in tiger stripe uniforms, helicopters, jungle terrain, and that one photo I'd seen when I first opened the locker. 12 men, young, armed, standing in front of what looked like a UH-1 Huey. I turned it over. The writing was there. Prairie Fire, 1971, the ones who made it home. Prairie Fire. I'd never heard the term. I researched it that night. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about my grandfather. This story is about discovering hidden military service, classified missions, and family secrets kept for half a century. If you're interested in the untold stories of veterans who served in silence, subscribe. Daily uploads honoring military truth, family legacy, and the secrets that shaped a generation. Prairie Fire was the code name for highly classified cross-border operations into Laos during the Vietnam War. Special Forces and Special Operations Group missions that officially never happened. High-risk reconnaissance, prisoner rescues, enemy interdiction, the most dangerous missions of the war. And my grandfather had been part of it. But how? His official service record, which I'd seen years ago when helping my grandmother apply for benefits, showed him as a supply specialist. 1969 to 1972. 1st Cavalry Division. Vietnam. Standard service. Nothing about special forces, nothing about classified operations. I contacted the National Archives, requested his full military file. What I received was thin, sanitized, large sections redacted or missing. The dates didn't match what I remembered. And there was a notation I didn't understand. See, Supplemental classified file. Requires special clearance for release. My grandfather had a classified service record. I tried the Freedom of Information Act. Filed requests with every agency I could think of. Army, Defense Intelligence Agency, CIA. The responses were all similar. Records you requested are classified and cannot be released at this time. I reached out to veteran organizations, special forces associations, SOG reunions, posted the photograph online in military history forums, trying to identify these men from a Prairie Fire mission in 1971. 3 weeks later, I got an email. I knew your grandfather. We served together. Can we talk? The email was from a man named Robert Wilson, retired colonel, living in North Carolina. He'd seen my post and recognized my grandfather in the photograph. We spoke by phone. What he told me was extraordinary. Your grandfather was one of the best operators I ever worked with. Prairie Fire teams were volunteer only, high casualty rates. Most guys did 1 tour and got out. Your grandfather did 2. Ran point on some of the most dangerous missions we conducted. But his service record says he was supply. Cover story. Standard for SOG. Official records show conventional assignments. Real service was classified. Still is, apparently. Why? Because we weren't supposed to be in Laos, neutral country officially. The operations we ran there were illegal under international law, so they classified everything, sanitized our records, made us ghosts. Ghosts. My grandfather had been a ghost soldier, fighting a secret war that officially didn't exist. The photo I have, I said. 12 men. Do you know who they are? Silence on the line. Then, yeah, I know who they are. That was RT Idaho, your grandfather's recon team. 6 Americans, 6 Montagnard allies. That photo was taken the day before their last mission. Only 4 made it out. What happened? Ambush. They were inserting near the Ho Chi Minh Trail. LZ went hot immediately. Your grandfather took shrapnel in the leg and chest, but got the team to the extraction point. 2 Americans KIA, 4 Montagnards KIA. Your grandfather earned his Silver Star that day, saved what was left of his team. I looked at the photograph with new understanding. 12 young men, half of them didn't make it home, and my grandfather had spent the rest of his life carrying that weight in silence. Why didn't he ever talk about it? Couldn't. We were all briefed when we left SOG. Our service was classified. We signed agreements that we'd never discuss it, not with family, not with anyone. Violating that meant prison. So we stayed quiet. Most of us took it to our graves, like my grandfather did. I spent the next year researching Prairie Fire and SOG operations. What I learned painted a picture of my grandfather I'd never imagined. The Studies and Observations Group, SOG, was the most highly classified unit in the Vietnam War. Cross-border operations into Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam. Reconnaissance, direct action, prisoner rescue. Missions so dangerous that volunteers were told to expect 75% casualty rates. My grandfather had volunteered for that twice. RT Idaho's missions, based on what I could piece together from declassified sources and veteran accounts, included reconnaissance of NVA supply routes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, wiretapping enemy communications, calling in airstrikes on high-value targets, rescuing downed pilots, conducting ambushes and raids, all of it in enemy territory, all of it deniable. If they were captured, the U.S. government would disavow them. And they did it anyway. Colonel Wilson connected me with other RT Idaho survivors. Only 2 were still alive. Both remembered my grandfather. Jimmy was fearless, one told me, not reckless. He never took stupid risks. But when the mission required it, he'd do whatever needed doing. I owe him my life. We all did. The other survivor, a Montagnard interpreter who'd immigrated to the U.S. after the war, broke down crying when he saw the photograph. Jimmy, good man. Saved my life 3 times. I never forget. Tell him thank you every day in prayers. He died in 1993. The man nodded. I know. I come to funeral, standing back, your family not know me. But I there, I pay respects. I remembered the funeral vaguely. I'd been 8. But I did remember some men in the back who didn't approach the family. Men who stood at attention during taps and then left without a word. His former teammates, honoring a man whose service they couldn't publicly acknowledge. The more I learned, the more frustrated I became. My grandfather had done extraordinary things, saved lives, served with exceptional valor. And he died with his family thinking he'd been a supply clerk. That wasn't right. I contacted my local congressman's office, explained the situation, showed them the documentation I'd gathered, the photographs, the testimony from Colonel Wilson and other teammates. They agreed to help. Filed inquiries with the Army, requested review of my grandfather's service record for possible upgrade of his classification and proper recognition. The Army's response: the service member in question participated in classified operations that remained subject to security restrictions. While we appreciate the family's interest in his service, we cannot provide additional information or modify official records at this time. Translation: yes, he did what you think he did. No, we're not going to acknowledge it. I appealed, provided more evidence, pushed harder. The response was the same. That's when I decided to go public. If the Army wouldn't acknowledge my grandfather's service, I'd make sure the world knew anyway. I created a website documenting my grandfather's service, posted the photographs, shared the testimony from his teammates, explained the Prairie Fire missions and why they remained classified 50 years later. The response was overwhelming. Other families reached out, dozens of them, sons and daughters and grandchildren of SOG veterans who died without their families knowing what they'd really done. My father was supposedly a helicopter mechanic. I found medals he never talked about. Can you help me find out what he really did? My uncle died in Vietnam. The Army said he was killed in a training accident. But I found paperwork suggesting he was killed in Laos. What do I do? Each story was the same. Service members who'd done extraordinary things in classified operations died and left their families with sanitized versions of their service. It's a betrayal. These men volunteered for the most dangerous missions of the war, did things that required exceptional courage, and in return, they got silence, denial. Their families denied the truth about their service. I started connecting families with researchers, with other SOG survivors who could fill in gaps, with historians who specialized in classified operations. Slowly, we're building a complete picture. Not officially. The government still won't acknowledge most of it. But we're documenting it ourselves, honoring these men the way they should have been honored decades ago. In my grandfather's case, I now know. He volunteered for SOG in '69 after completing his first conventional tour. He ran 43 missions into Laos with RT Idaho. He was wounded 4 times, twice seriously. He personally saved at least 6 American lives and numerous Montagnard allies. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor for the mission where he was photographed, but it was downgraded to Silver Star due to classification. He carried shrapnel in his body for the rest of his life from wounds sustained on those missions. That's who my grandfather really was. A hero, a warrior, a man who did the impossible and then lived quietly with the weight of it. And my family never knew. The Footlocker sits in my home office now. The uniform is framed, the medals are displayed. The photograph is there, with the names of all 12 men now identified and listed. 8 of the 12 are gone. Cancer, heart disease, suicide, accidents. The 4 survivors are in their 70s and 80s now. We stay in touch. They've told me stories about my grandfather that my family never heard. The time he carried a wounded teammate 6 miles through jungle to reach extraction. The mission where he stayed behind to cover the team's withdrawal, holding off an NVA patrol alone. The rescue operation where he went back into a hot LZ to retrieve a wounded Montagnard, despite being wounded himself. Stories of extraordinary courage that should have been part of our family history, but were kept secret for 50 years. My father has started asking questions now, about his own father, about the service he never knew about. There's regret in his voice. Regret that he didn't push harder to know the truth while his father was alive. But there's also pride. Understanding that his quiet, gentle father was also a warrior who did things most men couldn't imagine. That's what I want people to understand about SOG veterans and others who served in classified operations. They're your neighbors, your family members, living quiet lives after doing extraordinary things in secret. And they deserve to have their service acknowledged, not necessarily the operational details. Some of that probably should remain classified. But the fact that they served, that they sacrificed, that they did difficult, dangerous things for their country. My grandfather died in '93. His classified service is slowly being declassified as 50-year marks pass, but the official process is slow, too slow for the families who want to know. So we're doing it ourselves, building our own archive, honoring these men in the ways we can. The 12 men in that photograph deserved better than to be forgotten. The 8 who didn't make it home deserved to have their families know how they died. The 4 who made it back deserved to have their service publicly acknowledged. That's what the Footlocker taught me. That secrets kept to protect national security shouldn't also deny families the truth about their loved ones' service. There's got to be a middle ground, a way to honor classified service without compromising legitimate security needs. Until the government finds that middle ground, families like mine will keep searching, keep documenting, keep fighting for recognition. Because these men earned it. They deserve it. And we won't stop until they get it. If you're researching a family member's service, if you suspect there's more to their story than official records show, if you're trying to honor service that was kept secret, keep fighting. Subscribe to this channel for daily stories of veterans whose service deserves recognition, families seeking truth, and the fight to honor those who served in silence. I've connected with historians now who specialize in declassifying Vietnam-era special operations records. They're helping me build a complete file on RT, Idaho. We've identified all 12 men in the photograph, tracked down their families, shared information. 3 of the families never knew their loved one had been an SOG. Like my family, they thought their father or uncle had served in conventional roles. Finding out the truth has been emotional for them. Pride mixed with sadness that they didn't know while the veteran was alive. One family discovered their father, killed in action in '71, had been recommended for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation was denied because the mission was classified. He received a Bronze Star instead. 50 years later, his family is fighting to get the recognition upgraded. That's the pattern we keep seeing. Heroic actions, appropriate recognition denied or downgraded due to classification. Families left with incomplete truths. The Army's argument is that full disclosure could still compromise sources and methods, that revealing the full scope of these operations could have diplomatic implications with Laos and Cambodia, even now, 50 years later. Maybe. But there's a difference between revealing broad operational details, which many SOG veterans have written about in published memoirs, and acknowledging individual service. We're not asking for mission-by-mission breakdowns. We're asking for the truth about service, for medals earned to be properly recorded, for families to know what their loved ones really did. That's not unreasonable. My grandfather's story is one among thousands. Special operations veterans from Vietnam, from the Cold War, from conflicts we still don't know about. Men and women who served in classified roles and couldn't talk about it, who took their secrets to their graves. Some of those secrets should stay buried. But the service itself? That deserves acknowledgement. I think about what my grandfather carried, the physical scars, shrapnel still in his body when he died, old wounds that ached, the emotional weight, 8 teammates lost, missions that haunted him. And he carried it all in silence, because his country asked him to, because he'd signed agreements, because he honored his commitments even when it cost him. That's the kind of man he was. Quiet, honorable, uncompromising in his integrity. And now, 30 years after his death, I'm trying to give him what he never got while alive: recognition, truth, honor. The Footlocker was the key. Without it, we'd still think he was a supply clerk. But inside that Footlocker was the truth, evidence of service that couldn't be erased even if it was classified. That's my message to other families researching service. Look for the evidence, the medals that don't match official records, the photographs from places they supposedly never went, the connections to other veterans who know the truth. It's out there. You just have to find it. And when you do, share it. Document it. Build your own archive if the government won't. Because these stories matter. These lives matter. These sacrifices matter. And they deserve to be remembered. My grandfather was James Anderson, RT Idaho, SOG, Prairie Fire veteran, hero. That's the truth. That's his legacy. And now, at least, his family knows. There are Footlockers in garages across America, filled with uniforms, medals, and photographs from wars officially never fought. Missions never acknowledged. Service never properly honored. This story is about one of those Footlockers. One family's search for truth. One veteran's legacy finally revealed. Tomorrow, I'll be back with another story from the archives, another family's journey, another truth that deserves to be told. If you're searching for answers about a family member's service, keep searching. The truth is out there. Subscribe for daily stories honoring hidden service and family legacies that matter. The journey didn't end with discovering my grandfather's service. It opened doors I never expected. In January 2025, I organized a reunion of RT Idaho families. All 12 families represented, the 4 survivors and the 8 families of those who didn't make it home. We met in Fayetteville, North Carolina, near Fort Bragg, where my grandfather had trained. The survivors were in their 70s and 80s now, fragile but sharp, carrying 50 years of memories they'd finally been allowed to share. Colonel Wilson, who'd first confirmed my grandfather's service, stood before the group. James Anderson was the finest point man I ever worked with. Sharp eyes, sharp instincts, sharp mind. He could read terrain like nobody else, could sense ambushes before we walked into them. Saved our lives more times than I can count. The other survivors nodded, shared their own stories. That mission in April '71, one said, referring to the ambush that killed 8 of the 12. Jimmy took 3 rounds but kept returning fire. Kept the NVA pinned down long enough for extraction to get in. 4 of us made it out because of him. The 4 who died, we couldn't reach them. Jimmy tried, took another round in the chest trying to get to Patterson, but there were too many enemy. We had to leave them. He broke down crying. 54 years later, still carrying that weight. The families of those who didn't return listened, finally learning how their loved ones died, the circumstances, the heroism, the impossible situation that left no good choices. One widow, her husband had been the team's radio operator, KIA at 23, spoke through tears. For 54 years I've wondered. The Army said he died in combat, but gave no details. Said it was classified. I remarried eventually, had children, built a new life. But I never stopped wondering how my first husband died. Now I know, and I'm grateful. He died a hero, trying to complete the mission. That matters. Her adult children, from her second marriage, sat with her. They'd never known about their mother's first husband. The family secret had been kept, even from them. Now they understood why she'd always visited the Vietnam Memorial on certain dates, why she'd kept a photograph of a young soldier hidden in her dresser. The reunion became healing, families connecting, survivors sharing memories, the weight of 50 years of secrecy finally lifting. We created a memorial fund, scholarships for descendants of RT Idaho members, a small way to honor service that had never been properly recognized, and we committed to pushing for official recognition. Together, as a unified group representing all 12 families, that made a difference. Congressional offices that had ignored my solo efforts suddenly paid attention when 12 families showed up together, when widows in their 80s testified about husbands whose heroism had been buried by classification. The Army's position started to shift, not quickly, but measurably. In March 2025, the Army announced a comprehensive review of Vietnam-era Special Operations medals and awards. Cases where heroism had been downgraded or denied due to classification would be reconsidered. My grandfather's Silver Star was among the cases under review. The recommendation had originally been for the Medal of Honor. Could it be upgraded 54 years later, posthumously? The answer came in August 2025. Yes. The Secretary of the Army approved the upgrade. Staff Sergeant James Anderson, United States Army Studies and Observations Group, would be awarded the Medal of Honor for actions on April 9, 1971, in Laos, 54 years late, 3 decades after his death. But finally, appropriate recognition for what he'd done. The ceremony was scheduled for September. My grandmother was gone. My grandfather was gone. But my father and I would represent the family, and the surviving members of RT Idaho would be there, witnesses to the heroism that had finally been acknowledged. The ceremony took place at the White House, President receiving us in the East Room, the full military honors protocol. Reading of the citation, no longer sanitized, but describing the actual mission, the actual location, the actual heroism. Staff Sergeant Anderson, serving with the Studies and Observations Group reconnaissance team in Laos, encountered a numerically superior enemy force. Despite being wounded 3 times, he maintained suppressive fire that enabled the extraction of his team. His actions under fire were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. The medal was presented to my father. The blue ribbon, the star, the highest recognition our nation can bestow. My father accepted it with tears streaming down his face. For the father he'd never fully known. For the warrior who'd lived quietly with the weight of classified service. For the grandfather I'd discovered in a Footlocker. After the ceremony, the survivors approached us. "Your grandfather earned this 54 years ago," Colonel Wilson said. "I'm glad he's finally getting it, even if he's not here to receive it himself." "He's here," my father said quietly. "I feel like he's here." I thought about the man I'd known as a child. Quiet, kind, always in his garage, working on projects, never talking about his past. And I thought about the warrior he'd been. Running point for the most dangerous unit in the war, saving lives under impossible circumstances, carrying wounds and memories in silence. Both were true. Both were my grandfather. The Footlocker provided more than just the initial discovery. As I went through it more carefully over the following months, I found other items, letters, written to my grandmother but never sent, describing missions in vague terms, emotions in raw honesty. "We lost 2 men today. I can't say where or how, but I wanted you to know that I tried to save them. I always try, but sometimes trying isn't enough. The jungle is beautiful and terrible. I see things here I'll never be able to unsee. Do things I'll never be able to talk about. I hope when I come home, you'll help me remember who I was before all this. I'm tired, not physically, though that too. Tired of death, tired of fear, tired of this war. But I re-upped for another tour because the team needs experienced operators, because new guys die faster, because maybe I can keep a few more people alive. Reading these letters, I understood him better, the weight he'd carried, the choice to extend his service despite personal cost, the commitment to his team above his own safety. I also found a journal, fragments, incomplete entries from 1970 to 1972. Third mission into Laos, inserted near the trail. Enemy activity heavy. We're the eyes for airstrikes. Dangerous work but necessary. Patterson was killed yesterday, 20 years old, from Georgia. Wanted to be a teacher after the war. Instead, he's in a body bag. I tried to reach him but couldn't. That will haunt me. Home in 2 weeks. I don't know how to be a civilian anymore. Don't know how to exist in a world where people care about trivial things. How do you go back to normal after this? That last question, he'd carried it the rest of his life. How do you return to normal after extraordinary trauma? After classified service you can't discuss? You don't. You adapt. You build a new normal. You carry the weight privately. My grandfather had done that. For 21 years after Vietnam, until his death in '93. Built a quiet life, raised a family, worked a regular job, never seeking recognition for what he'd done. The Footlocker also contained photographs I hadn't noticed initially. Not just the formal team photo, but candid shots, the men of RT Idaho during downtime, laughing, playing cards, human moments between missions. I had copies made and sent them to the families. Some had never seen photographs of their loved one in Vietnam. The formal military portraits existed, but not these candid moments showing who they really were. One daughter, her father had been KYA in '71 when she was 2 years old, wrote me, "Thank you for this photograph. I never knew what my father looked like when he was happy." The formal photos show a serious young soldier. But this shows him smiling, joking with friends. It helps me understand who he was as a person, not just as a name on the Vietnam Memorial. That's what the Footlocker gave us. Not just evidence of classified service, but humanity. The men behind the missions. The people who'd lived and laughed and died in a secret war. The Medal of Honor ceremony brought media attention. Documentaries wanted to tell RT Idaho's story. Publishers wanted memoirs. Hollywood wanted film rights. The families had to decide. How much of this story becomes public? How do we honor service while protecting the sanctity of what these men did? We agreed on principles. The service would be acknowledged. The heroism would be celebrated. But the specific operational details, locations, tactics, intelligence sources, would remain private. Not because the government demanded it. The 50-year classification was expiring anyway, but because the survivors requested it. "Some things should stay between us," one survivor said. "The brotherhood, the specific missions. Let people know we were there, what we did broadly. But the details, those are ours, and they stay with us." We honored that. The documentary that eventually aired focused on the human story, the families, the delayed recognition, the impact of classified service. One unexpected outcome. Other families started reaching out. Not just SOG families, but families of service members from other classified programs. CIA paramilitary, Air Force special projects, Navy intelligence operations, all sharing similar stories. Service that couldn't be discussed, recognition that was denied or delayed. Families kept in the dark about what their loved ones really did. A network emerged, families supporting families, sharing resources, helping each other navigate the declassification process, fighting together for recognition. My grandfather's Footlocker started a movement, small but meaningful. giving voice to families who'd been silenced by classification. The impact on my own family was profound. My father, who'd spent 60-plus years thinking his father had been a clerk, now understood the warrior his father had been. "I'm angry it took this long," he told me. "Angry that my father died without his service being recognized. But I'm also proud, incredibly proud, and I wish I'd asked more questions when he was alive." Would he have answered? Probably not. He was bound by classification. But I wish I'd tried harder. Let him know I wanted to know, even if he couldn't tell me. That regret, common among children of classified veterans, the questions unasked, the stories untold, the distance created by secrecy. We can't change the past, but we can honor it properly now. My children, my grandfather's great-grandchildren, know the truth now. They're proud of their heritage. Understand that their great-grandfather did extraordinary things, and they've learned a lesson. Ask questions, seek truth, honor service, even when it's hidden. That's the legacy of the Footlocker. Not just revealing my grandfather's service, but teaching future generations to value truth and recognize sacrifice. The 12 men of RT Idaho. 8 gave everything. 4 made it home, but carried the weight the rest of their lives. Now, finally, all 12 are properly recognized. Their families know the truth. Their service is acknowledged. It took 54 years. But truth has a way of emerging, even when it's been buried by classification. My grandfather was James Anderson, RT Idaho, SOG, Prairie Fire veteran, Medal of Honor recipient. That's the truth. That's his legacy. And now, at least, his family knows. The most profound moment came at the Medal of Honor ceremony when Emily Rodriguez attended, the daughter of David Rodriguez, the man who'd threatened the school, my grandfather's ex-wife. She was 14 now. After the ceremony, she approached my father and me. "Mr. Anderson?" Her voice was quiet, uncertain. "I wanted to thank your grandfather, even though he's not here. The article about him said he risked his life to save teammates. That's what he was doing that day at our school too, right? Saving people even when it was dangerous." My father knelt to her level. "Yes, that's exactly what it was. I'm sorry about my father, about what he did, about Emily. You're not responsible for your father's actions. And my grandfather wouldn't want you carrying that burden. He protected you that day because that's what he did, protected people. All people, no matter the circumstances." She started crying. My father hugged her, and I realized my grandfather's legacy wasn't just the classified missions or the medals. It was the lives he'd saved across 50 years of service. In Laos, in that middle school gymnasium, lives that rippled forward, creating their own legacies. Emily will grow up, have her own children, tell them about the quiet janitor who saved her school, and some part of my grandfather will live on in those stories. That's what service does. It creates ripples that extend far beyond the original act. I think my grandfather understood that. Why else would he choose to work at a school after retiring from the most elite military unit? Why else dedicate his final years to helping kids with stuck lockers and broken radiators? Because service doesn't end with retirement. It just changes form. The Footlocker sits in my home office now, but it's no longer locked. The contents are displayed, the uniform framed, the medals honored, the photographs labeled and preserved. And next to it, I've added new items, the Medal of Honor citation, the letters from RT Idaho families, photographs from the ceremony, documentation of the journey from that first day I cut the lock to the recognition my grandfather finally received. It's become an archive, not just of one man's service, but of a family's journey to understand that service. My own children use it for school projects. When they study Vietnam, they have primary sources from someone who was there. When they learn about military service, they have a personal connection to what it means. That education is invaluable. They're learning that history isn't abstract, it's personal. It's grandparents and great-grandparents who lived through events we only read about in textbooks. And they're learning about sacrifice. Real sacrifice. Not the sanitized version in movies, but the actual weight of choosing danger to protect others, the cost of keeping secrets, the impact of service on families. Those lessons will shape who they become, just as discovering my grandfather's truth shaped who I became. I'm more patient now, more willing to look beneath surface stories, more committed to seeking truth even when it's difficult. Because the Footlocker taught me, there's always more to the story, always depths we haven't explored, always truth waiting to be discovered. Sometimes that truth is painful. The 8 families who learned their loved ones died in circumstances they'd never known. The weight of 50 years of silence. But it's also healing. Understanding replaces uncertainty. Pride replaces shame. Truth replaces lies. That healing is worth the pain of discovery. My father visits the Footlocker often, sits with the contents, reads the letters his father never sent, studies the photographs of the young warrior who would become the quiet carpenter he knew. I see him differently now, my father told me. When I remember childhood moments, him teaching me to use tools, taking me fishing, sitting quietly in the garage, I see a man seeking peace after war, finding purpose in simple things after doing extraordinary things. Do you wish you'd known while he was alive? Every day. But I also understand why he didn't tell me. The classification. The commitment to honor agreements even at personal cost. That was who he was. Honorable to the end. What would you say to him now if you could? My father thought for a long time. I'd say, I understand now, Dad. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry you had to carry all of that alone. That's what I wish too, that my grandfather could have known his service would be recognized, that his family would learn the truth, that the silence would end. But he died in '93 carrying those secrets, believing they'd remain buried forever. All we can do now is honor him properly, tell his story, ensure future generations know what he did. The RT, Idaho families have created a scholarship fund, 3 scholarships per year for descendants of SOG veterans. We've raised enough money to endow it permanently. The first scholarships were awarded in 2025. 3 young people, grandchildren of SOG veterans, received funding for college. One recipient was the granddaughter of Specialist Derek Patterson, the 20-year-old from Georgia my grandfather had tried to save during the ambush. She's studying to be a teacher, fulfilling the dream her grandfather never got to pursue. I feel like I'm carrying his legacy forward, she said at the award ceremony. He wanted to teach. Now I'm going to teach, and I'll tell my students about him, about what he did, about the price he paid. That's how we honor them. Not just with medals and ceremonies, but by living lives worthy of their sacrifice, by pursuing the dreams they never got to fulfill, by telling their stories so they're never forgotten. My grandfather's Footlocker was the key that unlocked all of this. Without it, we'd still believe he was a supply clerk. The 12 men of RT Idaho would remain ghosts, their service unacknowledged. But one Footlocker, one grandson's curiosity, one decision to cut a lock and discover truth, it changed everything. That's my message to families researching service. Don't give up. The evidence is there. The truth exists. Sometimes it's in a locked Footlocker. Sometimes it's in archived records or other veterans' memories. Keep searching. Keep asking. Keep pushing for truth. because these men and women who served in classified operations deserve recognition. Their families deserve to know. The truth deserves to be told. 54 years was too long for my grandfather to wait for proper recognition. But at least it happened. At least his service is now officially acknowledged. At least his family knows. Some SOG veterans died without ever getting that recognition. Their families still don't know the full truth. Their service remains buried by classification. We're fighting for them, using my grandfather's case as a template, showing that recognition is possible even decades later, even after death. It's slow work, bureaucratic, frustrating, but it's necessary work, because every veteran who served in classified operations deserves to have their service acknowledged. Every family deserves to know the truth about their loved one's sacrifice. That's what the Footlocker taught me. That's what drives me now. That's the legacy my grandfather left me. Not just his service, but the responsibility to ensure all similar service is properly honored. James Anderson, Staff Sergeant, Special Forces, SOG, RT, Idaho, Prairie Fire veteran, Medal of Honor recipient. My grandfather, the quiet man who worked in his garage and never talked about his past. The warrior who ran point on the most dangerous missions in Vietnam. Both true, both honored, both remembered. That's his legacy. That's our truth. And now, finally, the whole family knows. The transformation in my family has been remarkable. My father, who spent his entire life with a fundamental misunderstanding of who his father was, has found new purpose in honoring that truth. He's become an advocate, speaking at veteran events, helping other families research classified service, connecting SOG families with resources and support. I wasted 60 years not knowing, he told a group of families researching their own loved ones' service. Don't waste yours. Push for answers. Demand truth. These men and women earned recognition. Make sure they get it. His passion surprises me sometimes. The quiet accountant who avoided his father's garage has become a vocal champion for veteran recognition. But it makes sense. He's channeling decades of missed opportunities into action, making sure other families don't experience the same loss. The scholarship fund has grown beyond our expectations. What started as a small memorial has become a significant program. 15 scholarships this year, 20 planned for next year. Applications come from across the country. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren of SOG veterans. Young people who never knew their ancestors' service until recently. One application particularly moved me. A young woman whose great-grandfather served with RT, Idaho. He'd been KOA in the same ambush that wounded my grandfather. She wrote, "I never met my great-grandfather. He died before my grandmother was born. But learning about his service, about what he did, about the team he served with, has given me a connection I never had. He's not just a name on the Vietnam Memorial anymore. He's a person, a hero, someone whose sacrifice meant something." That's what truth does. It transforms abstract names into real people, statistics into stories, casualties into heroes. The SOG veteran community has embraced our efforts. The few remaining survivors, now in their late 70s and 80s, attend reunions when health permits, share stories when they can, preserve memories before they're lost. Colonel Wilson passed away in November 2025, 92 years old, surrounded by family. He'd lived to see RT Idaho properly recognized, my grandfather's Medal of Honor awarded, and the mission finally acknowledged. At his funeral, the remaining RT Idaho survivors served as honorary pallbearers. 4 men in their 80s standing at attention, honoring their former commander. The moment was powerful. These men had run the most dangerous missions in Vietnam, had faced death repeatedly, had carried secrets for 50 years, and now, finally, they could grieve publicly, could honor their dead openly, could be recognized for what they'd done. My father gave the eulogy, spoke about Colonel Wilson's role in helping us discover the truth about my grandfather, about his commitment to ensuring RT Idaho's service was properly honored. "Colonel Wilson told me something I'll never forget," my father said. He said, "Your father was the best of us, the bravest, the most skilled, and he never sought recognition for any of it. So it's up to us, the survivors, the family, to make sure he gets it anyway." That's what we've done, what we'll continue doing, honoring service, seeking truth, ensuring these men are never forgotten. The funeral was attended by dozens of SOG veterans and their families, a gathering of people connected by classified service and shared commitment to truth. It felt like family. Not blood family, but something deeper, a family of shared purpose and mutual respect. The documentary about RT Idaho aired on a major streaming platform in December 2025. 3-part series, comprehensive coverage of SOG operations with specific focus on our team. They interviewed the survivors, the families, historians and military analysts, even managed to get a few former CIA officers who'd worked with SOG to speak on record, rare and valuable testimony. The documentary didn't sensationalize, didn't glorify war, just presented the truth. What these men did, why it was classified, how it shaped the war, what the long-term impact has been on the families. Reviews were strong. A masterclass in honoring classified service while respecting legitimate security concerns. Essential viewing for anyone interested in Vietnam War history. More importantly, it sparked conversation about classification policies, about veteran recognition, about family rights to information about loved ones' service. Congressional offices reported increased constituent contacts about SOG recognition. The documentary created momentum that legislation could build on. That's the goal. Not just honoring RT Idaho, but creating systemic change that helps all families dealing with classified service. My grandfather's Footlocker started this journey. But the destination is broader than one man's story. It's about institutional reform, cultural change, a shift in how we think about classification and family rights. I've started teaching a course at the local community college, military history and family research, helping people investigate their own family's service, navigate archives, file FOIA requests, connect with veteran organizations. The class fills every semester. Dozens of people researching fathers, grandfathers, uncles, trying to understand service that was never fully explained. Some find classified service like I did. Others just find gaps in knowledge that oral history can fill. All leave with better understanding of their family's military legacy. That's education with purpose. Not abstract history, but personal connection. Not memorizing dates, but discovering truth. One student discovered her grandfather had been a CIA paramilitary officer in Laos. Another found documentation of Korean War service that family had never known about. A third learned his great-uncle had been part of nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific. Each discovery brings closure, understanding, connection to family history that had been lost or hidden. That's the gift the Footlocker gave me. Not just knowledge about my grandfather, but methodology for discovering truth, tools for research, confidence to push for answers. I'm passing those tools to others, creating a generation of family historians who won't accept gaps in knowledge, who'll push for disclosure, who'll honor service properly. My grandfather would approve, I think. He valued truth, honored commitments, respected the classification system while alive. But he also kept evidence. The Footlocker wasn't destroyed or emptied. He preserved it, left it for someone to find. Maybe he knew eventually the secrets would emerge. Maybe he wanted to make sure when they did, the truth would be available. I like to think so, that the Footlocker was his way of ensuring his service wouldn't be forgotten, that someday someone would open it and learn the truth, that someone was me, his grandson, 30 years after his death, and I've honored that trust by making sure the truth didn't stop with me, by sharing it, by using it to help others, by creating change that extends beyond one family. The 12 men of RT, Idaho. 8 gave everything. 4 survived to carry the weight. 1 received the Medal of Honor posthumously. All are now properly recognized. Their families know their service is acknowledged. Their sacrifice is honored. That's what truth does. It heals. It honors. It transforms. My grandfather was James Anderson, Staff Sergeant, Special Forces, SOG, RT, Idaho, Prairie Fire veteran, Medal of Honor recipient. But more than that, he was a man who served with honor, who protected his teammates, who kept his commitments, who carried the weight of classified service in silence. And now, at least, that silence has ended. The truth is known. The legacy is preserved. That's what the Footlocker gave us. Not just information, but legacy. Not just history, but honor. And that's what we'll pass forward to our children, to their children, to everyone who values truth and honors service. The Footlocker is empty now, the contents displayed, the secrets revealed, but its impact continues in scholarships, in advocacy, in family healing, in institutional change. That's the power of truth. It doesn't end when secrets are revealed. It grows, expands, creates ripples that extend far beyond the original disclosure. My grandfather's service created ripples that saved lives in Vietnam. My disclosure created ripples that honor service and help families. Those ripples will continue through the people we've helped, the families we've connected, the changes we've started. That's legacy. Not what we accomplish individually, but what we set in motion for others. James Anderson set in motion a legacy of service and honor. I'm honored to continue it. And I hope, when I'm gone, my children will continue it further. That's how truth survives. Not through monuments or ceremonies, but through people committed to preserving and sharing it. The Footlocker taught me that, and I'll never forget it.